Okay, I think maybe I'll just do the introduction, and then if anybody's coming later, they will probably get to the start of the session today. First of all, before introducing today's speaker, this is a part of the workshop series that the IGAC ICACGP Early Career Researchers Scientific Steering Committee is putting on. We're a group of 15 early career researchers that all work to try and improve the different options there are for early career researchers in atmospheric chemistry. We do that through communications. We try to improve outreach and try and, especially in developing nations, we try to do it through engagement. So trying to get early career researchers to join IGAC, all the activities, also to work together with other scientific organizations such as SOLAS and ILEAPS and LACIS, which are all also connected to IGAC and ICACGP. And then we have a third part that's career development, where this workshop is part of it. So we try and provide resources on our website, but also have speakers come and do a monthly workshop this year. And if you don't already follow us, we have all of these social medias opportunities down at the corner. And then we also have a newsletter that comes once a month, which you can sign up for on our website as well. Moving on to today's speaker. Today we're going to have a workshop on academic CVs. So Karen Boer from the University College London is going to give us his top tips for your next job application and how to write your CV. He has a bachelor and master's in civil engineering from India, the Indian Institute of Technology. Then he moved to England, did his PhD in environmental health and risk management at the University of Birmingham. And now he uses ground and space-based observations, chemical transport and health risk assessment models to study air pollution and health. And the reason why he's giving this talk today on CVs is because he has extensive experience with CV writing from both postdoc, fellowship, and grant applications. So I'm going to stop there and leave it to today's speaker.
Thank you, Simone. I'll share my screen. Let me know if you can see it in screen share mode. Yeah, slideshow mode.
Yes, it's awesome. Great.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start with a PhD comic series, which shows what is the importance of academic CVs. And I'll let you go through it for a couple of seconds. And this probably conveys why a typo is going to be a deal breaker, and it's really important to do proofreading for academic CVs. So there are so many things that we talk about. We talk about an application, we talk about a cover letter, but CVs are typically underrated. We leave them for the last minute, and so there's not a lot of time, and we are making edits till the very last minute. So there are potential opportunities that there could be a typo which is introduced on the last stage. So it's very important for us to proofread the CVs. And so I'm going to talk about what are the do's and don'ts for an academic CV. So the overview of the workshop is discussing the critical need for academic CVs. What are the different challenges that are associated with academic CVs? What are the typical elements that are included in an academic CV? Then I'll go through what are the top tips for structuring as well as formatting academic CVs. And then we'll do a round of evaluation where we'll go through some examples of successful and not so successful academic CV elements and try to assess what could have been done better. There'll be regular checkpoints throughout this workshop for question and answers, and I'll be prompting you, I'll be asking you a lot of questions in between. So feel free to reply via chat. If you want, you can raise hands and then unmute yourself as well. So we'll try to make this an interactive workshop. Yeah, I can't see the chat directly. So Simone, if there are any questions, just
I'll keep you notified of any questions.
Brilliant, thank you. So Before I start, I'll just give you a disclaimer that whatever I'm going to talk through in this workshop are lessons that I've learned from attending training sessions at UCL. These are learning from my PhD supervisor. So all of these are my suggestions. So they're not set in stone. The examples that I'll be going through are specific to the atmospheric sciences community, but they are typically applicable to most disciplines. There are also some CV requirements that vary across the geographies. So I'll try to focus on the common elements that are there, but I will suggest that if there are some specific regional requirements, then please do a geographic specific research as well while drafting your academic CV. So before I'll start with a question that why do we all think that there is a need for academic CVs? So this is somewhere where I'll pause for a few seconds and I'll let people put something in the chat. Why do we think we need an academic CV? Can we just get away with it?
Nothing in the chat yet.
We need an icebreaker activity.
Now, okay. To apply job as an academic, let the employers know what our experiences are. Faster for others to recognize their field of study.
Yeah, these are all great answers. And this is exactly why we need an academic CV. Academics typically put a lot of focus.
Put a lot of focus on elements other than what industry appreciates. To give overview about yourself and works. An academic CV to differentiate and select the perfect candidate for the project.
Yes, brilliant answers. And exactly, this is what we all, and they all converge at one point, and that is what is the next job that you're applying for, or are you applying for a fellowship? And in order to secure that job or fellowship, you need to showcase all your achievements. So as the CEO of the Cheeky Scientist says, it's a peer-reviewed timeline of your work history. So I really like this description of what an academic CV is. And as someone pointed this exactly, that we are showcasing our academic and professional achievements from the very get-go, from the first year of college to up to the present. So these are all the achievements that we have, and we need to be mindful what all goes in an academic CV. But when we talk about this need for academic CVs, and they are so important, there are also some challenges which are associated with academic CVs. For example, an assessor or a reviewer of the job is only having a limited time, and they have a lot of CVs to review. So they are looking for a reason to reject. So if you don't give them what they have asked for, there is a potential that your application is likely to be rejected. Academic CV doesn't have a one-size-fits-all solution, so you need multiple versions of academic CVs. Typically, you need a short form, which is around 2 to 3 pages, which you can submit in an application which is catered to that job requirement. And you also have a full length. It can be 10, 15 pages. It can be even longer than that, depending on how many achievements you have in your academic career trajectory. And the challenge is, how do we trim down from that full length CV and condense it down to just 2 or 3 pages? Because we get attached. There are so many achievements. We feel it's all important. It all needs to go in the CV. But what are those crisp achievements that are important to go in that short form CV and can land us with that job? The next thing is we need to strike a balance between CV and cover letter. Some job applications require a cover letter, some do not. In case they do not, then there is additional pressure that you want to highlight all your skills and achievements in your academic CV. In case there is a cover letter, we don't want to have a mirror image. Then we have to be picky of the elements that will go in the academic CV and the elements that will be retained in the cover letter. And as I mentioned earlier, academic CVs are typically underestimated. We tend to leave them for the last minute, and then there is a chance that there will be some typos and some issues later. I'll pause here for a minute just to see if there are any other challenges that you may have faced while drafting an academic CV, if you have already started working on an academic CV. I've tried to make a list of whatever I have gone through. But if you have additional challenges and you want to share it with the bigger group, feel free to add it in the chat.
Can I say something just without putting it in the
Sure.
chat? I think like the shortening one is good, but I think sometimes it's also then they ask you to pick your top something of your paper, like your papers you've submitted and everything, and write why these are your top ones. And I'm always like, but why do I pick this over this? And like they all have different meanings. And then top, like when you're an early career researcher and you're looking at like, oh, you have to give top 10 or something. I'm like, well, that's basically my entire academic career at this point. So here, but I can just see that in the future be like, okay, how do you pick which ones are your top publications? Like which not, and that's not necessarily just on which top as is your top 10 on citations, but I think that's one of the difficult ones for me in choosing which publications to keep in and which to take out.
Yeah, that is absolutely a valid concern that sometimes, okay, if you have, like I had 5 publications, and so I had to put those 5 publications. And it's important, then I have to see what are the different skills that I have, what are the different tasks that I have done. Have I done remote sensing in one, or have I used ground-based observations in one? It's basically trying to cover the gamut of atmospheric sciences and see what are the different skills I can sell with those publications. When you have more than 10, then it's also about the impact those publications generated. Were they cited multiple times? So you would probably want to highlight it as one of the top papers. What was the impact? Did it lead to some policy changes, for example? Did it lead to some new funding or grant opportunities? That did you use one as a pilot study? So there are lots of things that we can potentially use to trim down. I see some answers in the chat, and I'll go through
You have a
them.
lot of answers.
Yeah.
So one is sort of similar, like how can we pick the thing that actually need it or not is one of the challenges. Then there's also the project that I work on now is different than the project that the recruiter need. So my CV doesn't fit with the position.
Yeah, that is one challenge, which I'll try to probably address later in the.
Okay. So what is the perfect percentage match between CV and job recruitment? We technically look for jobs where we can also learn something new, not match exactly the job requirements, continue doing the same.
Yeah, this and the previous comment, I think, are very similar. That sometimes we may see a job advert and we see an opportunity that there is something new to learn, and we have like little to no experience on that job, or our CV doesn't do justice. So how do we go about it? And that is something which can be dealt with in multiple ways. One is you can't do a lot in your CV. If you have the like luxury of time, then there is a chance that, okay, you can reach out to the person who is the potential employer and have a conversation with them. Tell them that this is what you have been doing. I think that that's the best way to approach the situation. Reach out to the potential employer, ask them what are the things that you require, and then tell them about your background. Give them a description that these are the things that I have been doing in my academic career, but I'm really interested. If you show your curiosity, that you're actually driven and want to be part of that project, they would be more than keen to have you, because the recruiter, they are looking for enthusiastic candidates. A lot of people do this mistake in academic job applications, that they do not reach out to the potential employer in advance of applying. They wait for the application deadline and then they apply. So I would recommend, if you have a conversation with the potential employer, then I think you have an edge, and then you can definitely discuss and give them a heads up that, okay, I really like the profile that you are advertising, and I do not have relevant experience, but I'm interested. And then there's another element to it, and that is you can showcase that you have the transferable skills. You have done these things during your masters or your PhD or your postdoc, and this is how these skills could potentially be applied to the future job. They will never be the same, but you have to say that, okay, these are the transferable skills and how they can be applied to the next job.
Okay, we have two more comments. So one goes back to the different publications. So is it more important to present the most cited or the one you like better in your CV?
Yeah, so it again depends how many publications do you have and how much is the space. For example, if they ask for a 2-page CV and you have a lot of things to put in your CV, then you need to do this balance where you want to also say most cited definitely demonstrates impact. And the second thing is, if you feel the most cited publication is not relevant for your new job, then I think it's not that important. So you have to strike that balance. You have to see what are the publications that are more suited to the job advert. And if you feel all of them are suited, then I think most cited definitely demonstrates an impact that, okay, yes, this candidate has done excellent work and their work has been cited multiple times.
And the last comment, some recruiters are using AI to screen the CV. Hence, the usage of suitable words in our CV is very important to pass the first screening.
Yeah, that is true. That times are changing and we are using AI as well. So it's really important. It's unfortunate if they are using AI to screen, but it always depends how many applicants have applied. If there are lots of applicants and they're using AI, then you have to include some keywords and buzzwords that are definitely what the advert looks at. And in that case, my suggestion is try to pick the keywords that are there in the job advert. Try to see if they are being highlighted in your CV and cover letter if it was required. If the cover letter is not required, try to have those keywords popping somewhere in your CV, because that is what is important. That will give a match to the potential employer. That would be like a criterion of how they are trying to screen. Okay, I think there are no more, but there are so many challenges that we face with academic CV. So I thank you for your wonderful suggestions and questions here, describing the multiple challenges that we have. So going to the different elements that are there in an academic CV, these are in an order that I've listed that typically is the format of an academic CV. You would start with personal details. You would go through your education, background, research or professional or relevant experience, depending on whether you're applying for a postdoc or whether you're applying for a faculty position. Then you would have some awards, funding, publications, depending on what the job is, whether it's academic, your publications may be before awards. So the sequence can change depending on the job that you're applying for. You could have conferences or conference publications. Then there is teaching experience if you're applying for a teaching position. If you're applying literally for a teaching position, then 8th would be before publications. If you're applying for faculty positions, then you also have to showcase that some evidence of administrative experience. There is a small section again for faculty positions of professional memberships, which I'll go through. I'll go through all of these elements in detail. And then there is a growing section, which is called public engagement or outreach. Last is technical or other skills. So the list that I'm showing here is not exhaustive. There could be multiple other elements that can be added. It could be personal summary. Some people add leadership or mentoring, peer review. You could also add references. References are not necessary unless the assessor has asked to provide references with the academic CV. Now, I'll go through all of these elements in detail. But before I do that, from your experience, if you just want to put one number, what element do you think is most important in an academic CV from 1 to 12? Is there any specific element that we can say, or multiple elements that you think are important in an academic CV? To simplify, I'm just asking you to put the number. Or you can speak the number, that's also fine. 3, 8, 3, 2, 3. Multiple elements. 6. Okay, yeah. So there is this balance between research, professional experience, publications, and teaching experience. Some have also rated awards and funding. So the answer to this question is somebody unmuted themselves? They want to say something. No. Okay. Yeah. So the answer to that question is it varies depending on the position that you're applying for. If it's a research position, publications are more important. If it's a teaching position, your teaching experience is even more important than the publication. If you're applying for a faculty position, then funding also plays an important role. And yes, there's another aspect, which is country. So different regions also have some specific region-specific requirements. But typically, you would end up having all of these elements. And the reason I was asking this question is, which is that key element where you would spend most of your time customizing it over time and back and forth? What is the element you think is most important? So if you go to the personal details, this section just has name and contact details. I'm taking an example where you're listing what is your office address. And the purpose of this section is to indicate what is your current professional location. And you just list a telephone number or an email address, which serves as a means for the selection committee to reach out to you. Sometimes this section does vary with geography. I've heard people tell me that they also need to provide date of birth. Sometimes they have to provide marital status. Sometimes they have to provide a photo. So it varies with geography. But the key elements that are definitely there are name and contact details. You can indicate personal email if you feel that you have a current professional position, but the current contract is coming to an end. I see some annotations happening on the screen. I don't know if it's just my screen, but okay. And then you can also include a link to an academic profile or a website. So if you have spent a lot of time and you have a university profile or web page, or you have your own GitHub website or your personal website, personal in terms of professional achievements, then you could include a link in the personal details section.
So now there's a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about teaching position. Can we get teaching position during PhD? I haven't seen this in my country.
Yeah, so when we say about teaching position, this depends whether it's an academic teaching position, which is like a full-time position. So you would typically be required to have a PhD. And what you can do during your PhD is be a teaching assistant and or a lab demonstrator or take tutorials or seminars. These are a couple of opportunities that you can do during your PhD. And once you've finished your PhD, then you can get some qualifications, or like in the UK, we have higher education qualifications that you need for the teaching positions. So once you have those, then you can get a teaching position. But it's difficult to get a teaching position during your PhD because the focus of the PhD is to do research, and they don't want you to be involved in another job while you're doing your PhD. The second section is on education. So here we list the degree, the institution, and the dates, typically in reverse chronological order. And it's good to provide details of the program and department. So I've listed an example here that the PhD was done, this was the program, this was the department, this was the university. And a couple of things to keep in mind here are, if the degree was funded by any organization or a funding body, and you're not mentioning it anywhere else in the CV, then this is a good place to indicate what the funding body was. Again, you should include thesis title as well as name of PhD or master supervisor if you do not have a dedicated research experience section. So if it's a 2-page CV, I would not recommend having a research experience section. And so it's good to indicate who your PhD and your master supervisor are along with the education in the education section itself. One important thing which a lot of people miss when they are applying for jobs is acronyms. So if we have acronyms, we should declare them or elaborate them the very first time we mention these. And we should not assume that the reviewer or the assessor knows all of these acronyms. So like I have mentioned University of Birmingham as UOB. So if you see UOB a few times in today's presentation, that is because I've elaborated that in the very beginning. The next section in the long form CV is research experience. Depending on if you're applying for a faculty position and you have also done other jobs, like you were in the industry or you were in corporate, and it's relevant to the job that you're applying for, you could name that section as professional experience. And typically, But if you've stayed on the academic career trajectory throughout, then you could call it research experience, and you would include your PhD, your master's, your bachelor's research projects. And these would typically be accompanied with the project title, name of your supervisors, as well as timeline. And the synopsis, there should be like a brief synopsis which explains what the aims were, what the methods were, and what the outcomes were. So I have a PhD synopsis here where the location, the timeline, what the thesis title was, who the research supervisors were, a brief description of what was done and what was achieved, what was the outcome. You can make this as long as you want because it's going in your long form CV. And the purpose of a long form CV is that you can use that to extract some key elements when you're required to fill in certain sections of the application portal. Sometimes they don't ask for an academic CV in a conventional format, and they have 5 questions, and they'll say, okay, tell us about your research experience. So in that case, you can use your long form CV and curate sentences from what's there. You can also use this section to include project collaborators. So in the last sentence, the candidate has mentioned that they collaborated with Harvard University. So that is something that you can highlight in your CV if there was no dedicated cover letter. You could also use this section to highlight some tools and resources and data sets that you have used previously or you currently use in your research. Any questions so far? I'll continue, but if there are questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself, and then I'll pause. And if we're talking about professional experience, then there's a slight difference from research experience. In this case, you would probably give some more details. What is the name of the project, if it was applicable? And you describe what was your responsibility, what was your role in that bigger project, and what were the key outcomes. For both research and professional experience, it's important to include only those tasks and roles that are relevant to the position you're applying for. Don't add entries just to boost the length of the CV. We don't want to add experience which you have added in your CV, but then it's not directly linked to your job. The next one is awards. So I think this is the simplest one. It's self-explanatory that you are listing some awards. So here I have another question for you. I have 2 examples here, example 1 and 2 of 2 statements that are written by the candidate. And which example do you prefer and why? You could probably just say, which example do you prefer? And then if you want to unmute yourself. So I see some response. Example 1, that's faster to read. Some people say 2. Yeah, there are just 2 options, so it's going to be either 1 or 2. Does anyone want to mention why they think 1 is short and precise, 2 is more specific? Okay, I see more votes towards 2 now. So the answer is, okay, we also see 1. So the answer is 2. Depending on how much space you have, you may be more inclined towards 1 just because it's shorter to read and faster to read. But 2 gives you more example of, okay, this is an award. This is a best publication award. So definitely it gives us something more. But if you have an award in your CV, do not sell yourself short. It's important to tell the assessor what is the relevance, how prestigious this award is. So this is something which is missing from the example 1. In example 2, at least it tells us, okay, this is the best paper award only from the PhD cohort. So it gives the assessor some more information. Okay, why this is relevant. The first example doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell us whether how many people were there, from how many people that one person was selected, what is the relevance of that award. Only people from Birmingham may know about it. And people outside Birmingham, let's say if I apply for a job in India, they may not even know what this award is. So I need to look at where I'm applying. And depending on the space, I would want to have more details highlighted in the example. So if we don't give a lot of details, then it's a vague descriptor for the assessor, and they're not getting a lot of information from it. So it's important to give example too. The next section is funding, scholarships, and grants. So if you are in your master's or PhD career, then you would have some scholarships. If you do not have some scholarships, it's a good idea to apply for some travel grants or some bursaries just to attend conferences. Everything, even if it's a small amount of money, is important, and it can be added in your CV. So whether it's a very small pot of money or a big pot of money. And research grants, it's important to mention who the funders were. Again, we want to give the assessor some more information and what is the funded amount, just to give the assessor some sense, okay, whether it was a small pot of money or whether it's a large grant that you were part of. If you're indicating a grant, then it's also important to indicate what was your role in that grant. Were you a co-investigator, or are you just a research fellow on that grant? Because otherwise the assessor doesn't know what was your contribution in getting that grant. One of the examples here is listing
I was going to
different.
say, Karen, we have a question.
Okay, there's a question. Can I
yeah,
combine
can I
achievement with award? Yes, you can. So if you have experience, like achievements that can, so when you say achievement, I am assuming this would, can you describe a bit more about what these achievements are? Are these academic achievements? And if let's assume they are academic achievements, then yes, you can call it awards and accolades. That could be one potential heading. It could be lumped together. Typically, I would suggest it's good idea to lump together different sections if you only have one point under any heading. So if you just have one scholarship, then it's a bit odd in the CV to see it as a bullet point. So if you can combine these different items and then make a bigger section, then that would be neater looking. There's a point, if my supervisor got a funding based on my project, how to specify these? Yes, that's a great question. So in that case, there are a couple of follow-up questions. Did the supervisor include you when they were applying for the funding? What are you getting out of that funding? Are you being employed on that funding? What is your Yes, I understand that the project was done by you, but if the project is done by you, but the supervisor is now not paying you from that, then it's not your grant, that you're not being part of it, if that makes sense. But yes, if it was your project and the supervisor is funding you to work more or giving you a postdoc opportunity to work on for a research assistant opportunity for a few months, then that is how you, so I have done the same. The candidate list here, second point, which is research fellow or co-I on a project. So the candidate did some work, it was funded by some agency, and then that is how you could potentially list if the supervisor got the funding based on a project and they're also employing you. And the last point that I mentioned was indicate if there is a travel grant. Even if it's a small pot of money, it's important. And just to make the assessor's life easy, it's a good idea to add all these values in the same currency and include the total funding right at the top. So it's very easy that you're not giving additional work for the assessor to just add all these values and get a sense of, if you have multiple entries. If you just have one or two entries, it's fine. But if you have multiple entries that will be added over time, it's important to just add them all up and have the summary value right in the beginning of the section. The next is the most important section as per some people, which is publication. So yes, if you're applying for a research position, this is your currency. This is what will probably land you the next job. So it's important to spend a lot of time on this one and follow an academic journal style bibliography or a reference style. So the example here I have starts with listing what the total citations were, some key metrics like H-index, or the link to Google Scholar Profile or ORC-ID, and gives some statistics on how many papers are there, total articles, and also breaks them down by how many were peer-reviewed, under review, or in preparation. If you have a paper, if you are in your PhD career and you do not have any publications, then you can skip this summary statistic and just mention that one paper that you're currently working on. It can be in preparation, doesn't have to be submitted, doesn't have to be in review or published. if it's just one paper, but it's good to indicate that one paper, and I'll tell you why. And yeah, as I mentioned, so it's important to include all those publications that are under review, submitted, or in preparation, because they inform the assessor of what's coming, what's in pipeline. We want, let's say you are working on a postdoc and you spent a few years on that postdoc, but you haven't had a publication from that. But you indicated in your research experience. So an assessor would be curious, did a publication come out of it? But publications are most of the times they're not in our control. They take time. You're writing, you're editing, you are revising codes, you are redoing analysis. So there's so much that's happening in the back end, and the reviewer will not know it from your academic CV. So it's important to just highlight some in preparation articles that are there and include them in your CV. People have a lot of different opinions, but I feel my suggestion would be to include the in preparation articles. And the articles that are almost ready for submission, they can also be added here. So the candidate here has listed that, okay, the paper was shared with co-authors, but I've listed it in preparation articles. And it's important because it's not submitted yet. So you don't want to give the assessor a wrong impression that, okay, you don't want to lie to the assessor, because then it's going to be risky for your job application. But if you think you have shared it with co-authors and it's almost ready for submission, feel free to add this statement. If you have not shared it with co-authors, just mention in progress or in preparation. And the reason why I'm re-emphasizing this is there may be opportunities that you may be asked to share the draft version. And you do not want to add articles here. So when I say in preparation, does not mean that you can add 5-6 papers in preparation here just to show that you have a long list of in preparation or in progress articles. You don't want, because they'll ask you to share a draft version and you can just say that there's a title, we have the author list, but I've not written the paper, it's in progress. So it should be only those papers that you feel that they are in a state that if the assessor wants to see them, or if the assessor wants to have a look at specific sections, like they want to see what the results are, what the methods are, or how you've written the introduction, you should be in a position to say that. And in some geographies, I've also seen that they may ask you for journal impact factors. So there's a lot of growing concern about journal impact factors. So I focus more on including how many times the paper was cited. That's more important because that demonstrates the impact of your work. Journal impact factor does not necessarily demonstrate the impact of your work. And I see a question which is on how about in review status. So this is on the previous slide, which I'm showing now. And the submitted article, it's under review, and the candidate is mentioning, okay, this article is been submitted. So that's why I've split it by 3 sections: peer reviewed, under review, and in preparation. And if the article that you have worked on has been published and is getting cited, even if it's just one citation, it's important to mention the number of citations, because that is the metric. That is a metric I personally feel is more important than the journal's impact factor, because that demonstrates clearly what was the impact. A lot of papers get cited many times, and even high impact journals, they get cited fewer times. Like I have seen examples where one paper in not a high impact journal factor was cited 600 times. So that can bias the statistics of the journal. And that is why I would not recommend pointing to the journal's impact factor unless it is required by that specific country. So publication is your currency, and it's important to spend a lot of time, include publications, whether they are first author, whether you were the first author or not. Even if you are a 4th, 5th, or like the Global Burden of Disease does authors, there are 1,000 authors. You can't write 1,000 authors in your academic CV. So what you can write, you can say it's Global Burden of Disease, including your name. So you would not have to write 1,000 authors. The next is conferences or conference publications. So similar to the journal article publications, you can mention presentation title, name of conference, the location. It's important to indicate whether you were presenting an oral presentation or a poster presentation, and if you were an invited speaker. Before I continue, is APA format okay? It can be any format. You just have to be consistent. You can just pick any format for the publication. You just need to be consistent throughout. So here, this is from my CV, and I've listed a few conference presentations. I've tried to give an example of how the different entries can be. So it's important to give the presentation title. What was the name of the conference? What was the location of the conference? If it was in
Seems like we've lost our speaker. Yep. Welcome back.
aha, fun stuff. Okay, I kept speaking. I don't know where you guys lost me, but I'll start from the examples. Okay, just bear with me. Sorry for that. Yeah, so I was going through the conference presentation examples that they would typically include presentation title, the name of the conference, where the conference is being done. If you have the opportunity, please do indicate whether you were an invited speaker, and also clarify whether it was an oral presentation or a poster presentation. So some examples here, they list the titles, as well as if it wasn't invited, that is the place where you can have some bold text or italicized text. You don't want to emphasize every word of the sentence, but there are only, you want the assessor to just look at some keywords and see what's important. So invited could be bold. If you have some achievements in that presentation, like you got an outstanding student presentation award, you could potentially highlight that. Sometimes PhD supervisors or your line managers, they are busy and they may ask you to present on their behalf. So if that happens, feel free to add it in your CV because you did a presentation. Whether it was virtual, feel free to include that. Also, if possible, if the slides or the posters that you're doing, they have been uploaded elsewhere, or if you're uploading them on your own personal website, which highlights your professional achievements, then you can consider including a link as well. And what this link does, this gives you an edge over the other candidates because the assessor can quickly click on the link if they're not printing the CV. If they're printing the CV, then the link does not serve any purpose. But if they're not printing out the CV and they're looking at it electronically, they can quickly click on the link and they'll get a sense of how is your presentation style. Because that is important. If they want to recruit you and they are quickly, within a few seconds, they are able to look at your presentation style, that gives you an edge over the other candidates. Once the entries keep adding, they may not always be conferences. Sometimes they may be meetings. So you may want to tweak the heading a little bit of the section and call it science presentations. If you feel when you are like 6-7 years in your postdoc, or even if you're an early career researcher and you're getting lots of invited talks, like you've done a breakthrough research work and a lot of people are inviting you, you could then consider having a separate invited talk section. And then you can call this section science presentations. So that invited talk section is very important when you're looking for faculty positions. The next is the other section which people think was important. And it is if you're applying for a teaching position or a faculty position in this case. And typically it would have two elements. One would be training and the second would be experience. In some parts of the world, there are no training opportunities, but if there are, it would be good to have a dedicated training section of what are the different like laboratory trainings that you've done, or small group teaching, or how to deliver a seminar, or how to deliver a workshop, those sorts of trainings. And then the second would be teaching experience. Yes, Simone, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just because there's some questions about the previous slide. How do you
Okay.
cite a conference presentation done online like that done on GatherTown?
And so if you have the slides, you could, and let's say you have not uploaded the slides anywhere. So you could just put here talk, or if you think that you have few entries for both talk and poster, you could then split it. So if it's on GatherTown and you still had the opportunity to speak, like deliver a 5-minute full flow presentation, then that qualifies as a talk. But if you just had a poster and you were waiting for people on GatherTown to come visit by your poster, then that qualifies as a poster. I hope that makes sense.
And then if the recruiter is using the AI software to screen the CV, Sometimes links can be a problem. ATS filters of the CVs with embedded links, can that be solved?
Wow, that's difficult. Yeah, I don't know how you would potentially address that. Yeah, if anybody else has thoughts, feel free to unmute yourself for chat, because I typically add links in my CV just so that it's easy. But I get if AI is being used and links are being going to be a problem. I think, would links still be a problem if you still like if you had the keywords that were required for your job requirement? So that's something which I do not have an answer to. If the keywords are there in your cover letter or in your CV, I think your application should still make the cut. But yes, I'm not 100% sure on how that we can go about that. If you feel that that's an issue, another potential thing is, don't add a hyperlink. You could just add links for a few. You don't have to do it for all the conference presentations. Maybe few noteworthy presentations that you have delivered or posters. You don't have to add all the links. That is one easy way out to or work around this issue. So I was talking about teaching and training experience. And so when we talk about teaching, you could include training if you have any. And then in teaching, it's important to list two things. One is the type of teaching and the level of teaching. In the type of teaching, the elements that are typically present, they are lectures, or whether you did seminars or workshops or tutorials. And in level of teaching, it's important to state whether it was undergrads or postgraduates. So the example here lists the section of teaching, and it's classified into two subheadings, which is training and experience. Training just says, okay, small group teaching, gives the assessor some understanding that, okay, you've had some sort of qualification, and then yes, you are good suited to do some sort of teaching for postgraduates. And in your experience, you can list that whether you were a guest lecturer or whether you were a tutor or teaching assistant. But if you just stop there, it's not sufficient. You need to tell the assessor something more, because we are discussing an academic CV that helps you stand out. So you need to mention, what was your contribution? Did you design the lecture yourself, or did you deliver a lecture that was already created by somebody else? What did you do as a teaching assistant? Did you help in problem solving, or were you standing there and waiting for somebody to ask a question? What was your role? Whether you were participating in actively in a seminar, did you help lead some parts? Did you do some sort of marking? Assessment is also important. And if we don't give the assessor an idea, okay, that you have done some marking or you have done some assessments, that is missing out. So it's important to highlight all of these elements, what you have done as part of that teaching. If you have done lectures or seminars, it's good to list what the titles were. And lastly, indicate what that lecture or tutor job was for, whether it was for undergrads or whether it was for postgraduates. I see some questions.
Yep.
For just passed out PhD students, can we write about TA duties? Yes, absolutely. And the second thing is, but again, it depends. Is it suited for your job? Are you going to be doing teaching as part of the new job? If you're looking for postdoc opportunities, it's important to have a discussion with your potential employer and check with them that, are there going to be teaching opportunities? If they agree and say, yes, there will be, then it's a good idea to include TA duties. Because I feel there needs to be a starting point for everybody. And so even if it's a TA duty, feel free to add it in your CV. And what about if we have designed the short-term course for our supervisor? Absolutely. Even if you haven't delivered it, but you can say it in your experience. So then it won't count as guest lecturer, but it would count as contributed to module development, because you have played an active role and that is going somewhere. But you should highlight it, contributed to module development or course development. Say the title, say what that module was, whether it was undergraduate, masters, and what that module was. Because like the candidate here lists climate change, consequences of human activity. You can list a lot of things, but they should be relevant to the job that you're applying for. Any other questions so far? Yeah, keep putting questions in the chat and we'll pause. Now, going forward, if you're applying for faculty positions, this is not necessary for postdoc, but if you're applying for faculty positions, you may want to indicate how you have contributed to the school or college management. And so there is this section which is called administrative or other academic experience. This could include being part of committee memberships, if you're doing some organization of seminars, if you have some events experience, if you organized a conference or were you co-chairing a conference session. These are all the achievements that can go in the administrative or other academic experience. If you have had some positions of responsibility from your undergrad, postgraduate time, but you didn't have an opportunity during your PhD, feel free to still add that, because that would add some credibility and say that, okay, yes, there were some leadership opportunities that you achieved during your undergraduate times. For example, being part of international and national committees, being part of workshops and conferences. So the other thing is, depending on what you're putting in this section, you could change the heading. Like, I personally do not like administrative experience as a heading. And depending on what I put in my CV, I sometimes call it leadership. And again, it would depend on, the heading would depend more on what is the job that you're applying for. If it's a postdoc, you could still be fine with leadership. But if you're looking for faculty position, you may want to call it leadership and other academic or administrative experience. So these headings can be tweaked. They try to make them more engaging and something which is more personalized to your specific experience. Can we directly indicate, write POR as heading? Yes, if you elaborate positions with responsibility, yes, that can be there. But if you just say POR and don't elaborate the acronym, then that's going to be a problem. The point here is positions of responsibility is fine up until you are elaborating what your role was. For example, if you look at the conferences and workshop in this example, it says organizing committee member, session chair, gives the assessor some sort of information of what the candidate's role was, led e-poster sessions, mediated e-poster session. If you write PORs, it's important to also say what you did and how that links to your future job. If it's a POR just to add length to your CV, I would not recommend adding that. But if it's something which showcases a skill and says, okay, this is a transferable skill that I gained from my achievement of that PO or holding that position of responsibility, then yes, please do include that. Coming towards the end of the elements of CV, there's professional memberships. This is something which is easy for people who attend conferences. You could include your professional memberships, or if you have affiliations to any professional bodies, they do not have to be global. Like one common example would be EGU, AGU, ACS, AMS. These are typical professional memberships. We tend to forget about them. We do attend some of these conferences, but if you don't include them, then you're missing out. So it's easy, just adds 2 or 3 lines, but it also demonstrates that, yes, you have contributed to professional memberships. Sometimes there are some local groups or regional or national groups. So feel free to add those as well. I see a question which mentions, do colleges ask for POR certificates during interviews? So this is something which is region specific. And typically they would not, because an interview would be 30 to 45 minutes where they want to assess your skill. Interviews that I have undertaken where they ask me about any of my POR certificates. But I would say it could be region specific. In some regions, they may ask you, but they would ask you beforehand. They would not ask you during your interviews. They would just give you a heads up, okay, if you're coming for the interview, please do bring your certificates. What are some professional memberships that I can join now? So these can be some memberships that are within the region. For example, in the UK, we also have Royal Meteorological Society, Royal Chemical Society, Royal Society of Geography. So you may have to do some regional search to understand what are those regional. The ones that I've listed here, these 4, they can be joined at any time in the year. And they have a nominal membership fee for the year. Some professional memberships are free, but majority of them just take a very nominal fee, and then you are a member for a year. The ones that I've listed here are for Europe and America, but people from anywhere across the globe can be members of this. Then there's a question on, can ResearchGate be added as a professional association? So ResearchGate is more of a social media channel, and you could add that profile of ResearchGate in your personal details, the first section that we went through, but that would not qualify as a professional association. Because what are you gaining out of that ResearchGate? It's more like social media. You're posting your papers, you're going through papers, sometimes you're answering questions. Yeah, unless ResearchGate takes it to the next level and they add some feature which makes it qualify as a professional association, I would say uh, maybe add the link in personal details, but not here. So now we go to something different, which is not directly not linked to your papers, but it's important, and that is public engagement. And this talks about the lectures that you've given to the public, how you dissipate science to the public, whether you've given any media interviews, or you have done some workshops to school children or to elderly people. All of these qualify as public engagement or outreach activities, activities where you've tried to dissipate your findings to the public. So one example here is writing for the conversation. So the conversation is like a news channel, but you try to write or dissipate your science findings in a format that is accessible to all. And that can be presented, so it can shared worldwide. Then you can also add quantities or statistics here, such as how many times it was read, how many times people tweeted about it. This demonstrates the impact of that work that you did. You could also develop some educational dashboards. And if you do so, good idea to include the link to the dashboard, or mention, if links are going to be an issue with the AI, just mention how many times it was viewed. If they are interested, they'll probably ask you, okay, share the link to the dashboard. So I think views are also important. You could include, if you took some workshop with school children, or you had a chance to present it to elderly people, anything else. There are lots of activities that can be done. You can also include a lot of activities. Typically, it's also called outreach. And this section is becoming increasingly important, whether you apply for postdoc as well as faculty position, because they want to know how you are able to communicate to research, not just to the research community, but to the wider public in a non-technical or a jargon-free language. Can you communicate your science in an accessible way? So like somebody told me, if you're able to tell your grandparents, or if you're able to tell your parents, okay, this is what I do, then I think you can do public engagement, because then you are able to communicate to everybody of what is the work that you're trying to do. And this is one section which is becoming increasingly important. And even if you do not mention it in your academic CV, there's a high chance there will be an interview question based on public engagement for your faculty position interviews. And it's important because the work is so interdisciplinary, so you have to communicate research to the public. I'll go through some
What about
questions now.
open house? Can you include that in this section? Is one of the questions.
Yes. So open house can be included depending on, again, what was your contribution? If you're able to elaborate how you have contributed, and if, let's say, is there some tangible metric? Can you say, okay, this was the outcome of that? If not, but even if you are able to explain what was your contribution, were you a panelist? I mean, were you just speaking out there and you contributed to a discussion? Yes, feel free to add that as public engagement.
Can moderating a conference be added under this section?
Yes. So moderating a conference can be added in two sections, and it depends on what kind of conference it was. If it's an academic conference or it's a science conference, then it probably goes to the section of administrative experience, and you could add it as leadership. If it's a non-academic conference, let's say you were attending conference of the parties, if you're attending a COP meeting, and if you're participating or moderating a session there, then it's more of public engagement, because there you are having the audience which are beyond the scientific community. I hope that answers the question. And then we go to the last element, that is technical or other skills. So it's important for research positions, but then these tend to fall away with time. Because you would have a lot of qualifications. You would say, okay, you did R, you did Python, you did MATLAB, you did so many different things, but do you use all of them? And these are not necessarily necessary if you have already included them in the research experience section, or if you're including them in your cover letter. Sometimes we do just add Excel, Word, PowerPoint, but then don't add them as a skill. If you know VBA and Excel, that is a skill that you could potentially include. But if you know Excel, then I think that would be like a baseline. So do not include Excel, Word, or PowerPoint unless it's a specific skill which is in these platforms or softwares that people are not aware of or use, and it's going to be relevant for your job. Then the next thing is, it's good to include these if the job description or the person specification says, for example, I use MATLAB during my master's, but now I rely mostly on R and Python. So it's good to include MATLAB if the job specification said, or the person specification mentioned, that the coding has to be done in MATLAB. I could just brush off those skills, revise, and then apply. So the assessor would probably be keen to see, okay, yes, I do not have MATLAB anywhere in my CV, but I do mention my technical skills. So I am used to this software. I'll take a small break here and we'll see if there are any questions. You feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hands.
Also, maybe thinking about the time, it's now an hour.
Sure. Yeah, the rest of the bits should be quick.
I can just answer. There's a question about whether this recorded video will be shared, and I assume, Karen, you're okay with it being shared in the end.
Yeah, that should be fine.
So it will be shared on our website, just like the previous workshops we've had are shared on the website.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then I'll probably go to the next section. And Simon, if possible, just let me know when it's 15 minutes. And yeah, then I'll hurry. So now I'll be going through some top tips. So we'll probably revise what we have learned so far. And these are the tips that would probably give you an edge over the other candidates. So I'll go through some tips regarding structuring the CV. Now, and then I'll go through some tips regarding formatting. What are the common issues and errors that we come across, as well as how you can go about the content that's in your academic CV. So first, we'll go through structuring the academic CV. And the first instruction is just follow what the instructions are. So if you have been asked for a 2-page CV and you submit a 3-page CV, it's likely that your application will be rejected because you're making the assessor's job easy. They asked you for something, you're providing them something else. If there are no cover letter requirements, then it's important for you to see what are the important elements of the academic CV that are relevant to your job. Just don't include everything, just to add that, oh, you have done everything. But what is more important? If public engagement is not important, do not add that. If professional memberships are not required for a 2-page CV, what is more important? Your publication. If you're applying for a postdoc, don't include your teaching experience. And also, just don't add elements which are not relevant. For example, if you worked in industry or corporate and that's not linked to your future job, do not mention it in your academic 2-page or 3-page CV. It's important to have a long form CV that has all this information, and then you have to prioritize. If it's a teaching position, then you prioritize your teaching experience first. If it's an academic or a research position, you would prioritize publications over teaching. And depending on if it's a short form CV, if they don't put a limit on the CV, then you can have a dedicated research experience section, because that can grow. With time, you do different projects and every project has like a full paragraph to it. So if there is no limit, then keep it in your CV. If you have to submit a short form CV and you're out of space, then move with the research experience to the cover letter. Include references only if you've been asked to provide that, and avoid vague statements. I think we discussed one example. So if you mention you got a leadership award or you got outstanding performance, that doesn't tell the reader a lot or the assessor a lot. And so it's important to say, what is the leadership award in? or what determined your outstanding. Give some quantifiable metrics. Give some out, like, was it top 1%? Introduce the acronyms the first time you use them. Please do not assume that the reader knows these. You may be applying in a different geography. So they may not be aware of all the acronyms that you're potentially used to using them in your daily language, daily communication. I'll just pause. There's a question. If nothing is asked, a short is preferable or long? I think then it depends on you. Are you able to condense all your skills in 2 or 3 pages? If not, and if you feel it's a relevant, if all your skills are relevant to the job, then why not submit a long form CV? If you've got a long list of publications, I think this is something was one of the challenges. Then you have to select what is most relevant. It could be those which have a lot of citations, but don't just put up a publication that has 500-600 citations if it's not going to be relevant for the job. So I think it's more important to put what's more relevant and include some summary statistics at the top. That could include, and that gives the reader or the assessor an idea, okay, this person has 20 publications and they are only highlighting 3 because you had to put the top 3 or the best 3 publications that you feel. And do not include conferences that you've just attended. If you're a delegate at a conference and you're not presenting or participating, like presenting an oral presentation or poster presentation, please do not include those conferences because they don't have much value. Some more metrics, some more things that you could potentially add in your academic CV would include media coverage. And this is something which can often set you apart from your competitors. Try to avoid local school bulletins. They don't count much. But if you have media coverage, even if it's a newspaper article and they quoted your scientific study, it's important to just mention it in your narrative academic CV. I've also listed a few things that you may not have at the moment, but with time, as your career advances, these may get added. And so you may have a lot of quantitative metrics. Once you have a few papers, you can include H index, you could include number of citations, you could include invited presentations. If you do not have any invited presentations, go ahead and invite yourself. If there is a school seminar series that's happening, just go and say that you want to present. And that is how you can potentially start building up. That's how I did it. That was my first invited presentation, that I had to tell the person at my college that, okay, I would like to give a presentation. You can do peer review for journals and also for funding agencies. Once you are thinking of tenure track or faculty positions, you also need to supervise students. So that supervisory track record or going through external examiner PhD vivas, additional leadership roles that could contribute to national as well as international esteem. If you have some patents or intellectual property that's come out of your research, that's again something that will set you apart from the other candidates. If you have some collaborations outside of academia, that's also important to indicate in your academic. These are some of the many things that you could include to set you apart from the other candidates that are applying for the job. Are there any questions so far?
There's one, but it's about something else, and I think Max
Okay.
has
Sure.
replied.
Then I'll go to formatting academic CVs. So this is something which gets left till the last minute. So it would be nice if all the sections are in reverse chronological order. Most recent should always be placed first. The section should be distinct. Try to have clear headings and subheadings. Margins should be at least an inch so that if people are old school and they want to print, you have to just be mindful. You don't want to take all the margins just because sometimes the tendency is if it's a 2-page CV, you want to take the entire A4 and have minimal margins as possible. Try to avoid large white spaces that can be there. Avoid italics. As I mentioned, try to use them very sparingly and only if you want to emphasize certain bits. Sometimes, and avoid long paragraphs. Don't have any sentence which are 3 to 4 lines longer. If that is happening, try to introduce bullet points. And if you're using bullets, just use simple bullets. Don't use the fancy ones that I've used in the slide today. Keep the format of the CV neat, simple, and try to be consistent throughout. If you say Jan and not January, try to keep it Jan throughout. If you replace Jan with 01, then try to say 01 throughout. Because it should not be like you have Jan in some, and then you have July, because July is 4 letters, so it becomes full word July. So just some minor formatting tips. And finally, try to avoid overly descriptive language. Try to use active words. Don't say I did this. Just directly come to the point, save some space, achieved, blah, 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 controlled, blah, blah, blah. If you're using AI writing tools, just use them with caution. Sometimes I've seen my friends and peers, they use ChatGPT to generate a CV. So it's a fun activity, but then the output should be used with caution. It's important to fact check everything, that nothing has been tweaked or changed. Check for spelling or grammar errors. It's important to solicit feedback. Try to send your CV well in time to others, and whoever you can trust that they'll provide you an honest feedback. Just send it to them. If you're confused, you can also look at online examples of certain sections of how they should be written, what should be done, what should not be done. I hope this workshop was useful. But then there are always things that it will improve with time, and you may want to look at certain examples of certain elements and sections. Lastly, which is my most important tip for today, and that is give yourself enough time to revisit the CV with a fresh pair of eyes. We work so much on these applications, and then we are constantly looking at them. So there are chances that there may be some typo. Please do proofread before you submit this application. Any questions so far? Is there a point where you should start adding quantitative metrics? I only have a few publications so far, and I've always wondered if including my lower H index is worth it. I would say it's absolutely fine to include your H index, and because that will keep building. If you think it's just 1 or 2, it's still good, because that demonstrates that your work is being cited. The only thing that you should probably do in that case is so H index can be calculated in 2 ways. One is exclude the self citations. So if you say it's just a few papers, and it's a lower H index, it's perfectly fine. Just clarify it excludes self citations, and I think you should be good. You don't have to wait for a certain point in your career trajectory. It's an important statistic, so should be good.
Thank
How
you.
are we doing? Okay, we have, I think, a couple of minutes more, right?
Sure. I mean, we also have the time for the coffee break afterwards. So
Sure. Now, I mean, I think now we are just going through the last section. So we'll take, I think I have 8 examples, but we'll try to make it quick. We won't take all the 8 examples. Is there a point to write manuscript number in under review paper? Do you mean like serial numbers, as in like manuscript number? If it's more than 1, then yes. If it's just 1, then it's fine if you want to omit the manuscript number, if I understood your question correctly. But if not, please elaborate your question. So given we have a few minutes, I wanted to go through some examples of successful academic CVs. And I wanted to give you all the opportunity to apply some learnings and be an assessor today and review some of the elements. I'm not going through the entire CV. I just want to put some CVs out there, the elements out there, and say, does it look good? You have the opportunity to be critical and just say, could anything have been done better? So feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, and I'll start with the first one. It's Mike Robinson. So it's a fictitious character. So it's a fictional CV. And what we are looking at is just their personal details and the profile. If there's anything that you can spot, that'll be good. I won't be disclosing all the answers. This is your opportunity. So I'm going to be silent now. Thanks for clarifying your question. You just submitted the paper for the publication and got the manuscript number. I think that's not relevant. That is fine, because you can't track the manuscript after you've submitted the, like, you can track it because you have submitted it or you are the corresponding author, but others cannot. So that will not serve any purpose. Acronyms are unclear. Yes, exactly. That is the major concern with this description here that there are so many acronyms, and so many people on the call may or may, I mean, if you're familiar, fantastic. I was not familiar with these. So acronyms are unclear, and it's everything looks good, but the acronym should have been elaborated. I'll quickly go through the second one. So this the same candidate, they've described their professional experience. Hannah, well spotted. Yes, it said that not been checked over. Yeah, I mean, it said personal details included here, but it was at the top, yeah. Are we all happy with this one? Personalization of achievements. Okay. What do you think about the
I think
presentation? Yeah, go ahead.
no, just based on what we were talking about before, you still have all the acronyms here and still like and even more acronyms.
Inconsistent
I mean,
formatting.
I can figure out
Yeah.
what they're supposed to be, I think,
Mhm.
but it would be nice to be certain.
Yeah. So this is exactly what happens when we get attached with our achievements and we forget. So that's why I've been re-emphasizing. And it's important that you guys have spotted this. It's really important to elaborate all the acronyms so the assessor can follow along. And as someone spotted, there's inconsistent formatting. It's too long. It's in a paragraph. You don't want to read a paragraph. The reviewer doesn't want to go. If there's something important, you could have highlighted it. Give some tangible outcomes. There's lots of things, but we don't have the luxury of time to go through each one of them, but you can, you'll probably have access to the slides and the recording. We'll go through the next one, prizes and awards.
Uh, 2008, I think there's a gap there. Nothing is being showed. The third year, that's it. The years he has there, 2008 to what? Nothing is being shown there.
Yeah, maybe it was
The
just for the
duration.
same. Yeah, I don't know if it was just for the same year. But yeah, with the way the formatting is, it makes it a bit, there's like a gray area, whether it was just for 2008 or for longer. And someone
So in
pointed, yes, there's not enough
that,
detail. Go ahead.
yes, sure. So in
Scholarship
that case,
amount.
what do you do?
Yeah, so in that case, you could set the formatting in such a way that you could potentially, instead of starting with that, you could mention it towards the right side and end with the years. So it would make it very clear. Or a better, easier solution if you want to stick to this formatting is also list the months. Because then you could list both entries of 2008 and say whether it started from July to November 2008. That is an easier fix to this problem. Just include the months.
Okay.
Scholarship amount, not enough detail, importance of awards and metrics such as grant amount or not. Yes. And what are these awards? What is the first scholarship? Why was the candidate awarded this scholarship? We have no idea. And is it relevant to the job that they're applying for? The next is looking at funding. So this is from, yeah, I think the same candidate, and they had a dedicated funding section.
There's also inconsistencies in the presentation. Some places he indicated the amount involved in the fund, and others he didn't indicate.
Yeah, and in some you have it in different currencies. So
Yeah.
that's another point. Anything else? The contribution is missing. What was they have listed a lot of authors, and so it's difficult to say what is the contribution of the candidate towards getting that funding. That is absolutely missing. And acronyms, yes, acronyms are being mentioned back and forth. We'll go to the next one, which is, so this is another candidate, and this is their publication list. I'll tell you the candidate is N. Anwar. just so that in case it helps you spot anything else. The first author in the first line is the candidate.
I mean, the third paper doesn't even have that name.
Exactly. Yeah.
But also, I mean, the other three, it would be nice if you like made it bold or italics or whatever to make sure this is the person these we're focusing on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the point, that the assessor has to work hard and you don't have so much of time. So if he makes these kind of errors, our application is likely to be rejected. And that's why I wanted to go through some of these examples. I think this is the first candidate, Mike Robinson, and they have presentations here. So they're listed, invited, oral poster. What do we think about this one?
Excuse me, my word, but to me it looks awkward. I think the oral invitation should be on top. It shouldn't be so misaligned. I think there's misalignment in terms of how he has done it. So let's say invited should have been highlighted, then the other points bulletin should have been beneath it, instead of those invited being aligned differently and the other way around. That's my take on it, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Uh, it's one entry and you have 3 bullet points. It's just going subheading, subheading, subheading. It could just have been one.
Yeah.
Anything else? Or we feel it's looking good. This is how we would want to have presentation. Inconsistent author name format. Exactly. Yes. Another one. First, sometimes you're writing the surname first. Sometimes you're writing the first name. So there's inconsistency. Well spotted. Then we go through public engagement.
Same bulletin issue.
Mm-hmm. We are becoming better at spotting formatting issues. So I feel good about it. Anything else? Yes. So there's one answer, not enough detail. Quantification is missing. The candidate says talking at school career days. How many? Was it done once? Was it done 10 times? What's the time period? Have you been doing it throughout the year? Judging awards, radio experience, appearance once, twice, Q&A with the public. It's very vague. It does not provide the assessor with sufficient information. When you say public, it could be 2 people in the room. It could be 200 people in the room. So there should be some fundraising. How much was the amount that was fundraised? And how was that linked to? How does this public engagement link to your potential job? Someone says CREST acronym. Yes, it's not described. No details such as date, year, links. Yes, all of the well spotted. All of these are correct answers because there's so much missing. And the last one is the same by the other candidate, which is, and they've labeled it as scientific outreach.
So with this one, the 2011 and 2010, the duration for the work is not indicated.
Yeah, and it's important because if you look at the last and the end of the statements, it says contact us 3 and 4. Maybe the idea was just to say, okay, 3 hours in the whole year. So in a way, it's fine. I would not say it's going to be a lot of issue, but I think the major issue is they've tried to quantify the hours that they spend, but how many students they were working with. So that is something which is missing. It does not tell us the scale of the impact or the outreach activity. The first sentence starts with participating in multiple events. How many are these? Multiple is vague. Again, it can be 2, it can be 20. We don't know how many events there were. Anything else that we guys feel are an issue? This candidate has definitely a much better section. If nothing, then yeah, I think we come to the end of the workshop. If you have any questions, this is the time, or you can also contact me via email or X if you feel like. And I'll pause, and then I can also stop sharing.
Thanks for a great presentation and very engaging one. I think it's been one of the most engaged workshops we've had so far. Before everybody leaves, I'm just gonna introduce the speaker that we're gonna have next month. So our next workshop is going to be the challenges of oral presentations, perspectives from an old timer by Dr. Graciela B. Raga from the University of Mexico. I can't speak any Spanish, so I'm just going to leave it at that. She's going to talk about the initial jitters of the first presentation in person, how you're going to develop a narrative of your presentation, how to make your point and get it across to your audience, and how to rehearse in the timing. It's going to take place on August 22nd from 3 to 4 p.m. UTC, and using the bottom link here, you can register, but we'll also put out flyers and everything on all of our social medias that I showed you the text for earlier. For those of you that want to stay, we're going to stay on the Zoom call for coffee and chat, and it's a good way to meet all of us on the committee who's going to be in Kuala Lumpur for the conference as well. But otherwise, this is the end of the workshop.